Okay, I believe we're actually live now.
Yeah, sweet.
I'll get that link for you and send it through. It's precise moment, it's when YouTube so much load.
I realized it's like a doggy
You are currently on stream.
All good.
Copy link and send that through to you. And I'll share it on the Facebook page as well.
Sweet.
I'll just send you the link.
If I could, I've already done the first year. I've already done the latest 12 years. Awesome. So 5 years.
Hey, Greg, we have all the results in.
Sweet, bring them up.
So,
Yeah.
Callum 1.
So Liam 1, Callum 1.
Michael 1.
I didn't get as lucky that time.
Just double checking that second one. It is Callum at 1, right?
Yeah.
Sweet.
I dropped 2
And Michael 1 or Roll 1?
I won.
Michael 1, sweet.
I count.
Man, this is going to be a
I'm
quick
probably
night.
wanting to I need to take one out.
Okay, just get that muted.
Alright, real quick, Liam, you're up against Michael. Callum, you're up against Rowan. Tamid, you're up against Daniel.
Sweet.
Okay, so Callum and Michael are the only ones that swap.
Callum and Michael swap? Yeah.
Let's share this.
No, I still don't.
No, it only works if we play sideways.
That's the most
Yeah.
We're going, right?
Yes, you're
Sweet.
fully good.
Cool. Hey everybody, I'm Jarrad. If you have seen my 3D cards on the fan page, and so I saw a few people asking how do you do it, so keen as to just sort of show you all my process of how it all works. Today what we're going to be using is Visceri. I'll be using Visceri because I've been doing a few of them recently, so it's pretty fresh in my mind, so a nice easy one to use to show you. But I'm going to do it basically as if I've never done a Visceri before in my life, to show you the process that I go through for the different layers. A couple things when we go through this is probably the hardest part that I found doing these when we are going through the entire card is actually figuring out the layers, so that's the first thing we're going to talk about tonight. Before we do that, I like to have a look at the 4 tokens I have. It sounds weird, but any of the unlimited ones tend to have a more faded picture. Surprisingly, Visceri is one of the few that doesn't, from what I've found, but especially cards like Bravo, you'll see it's real faded in the unlimited version. Also, if you're doing a Bravo as an example, you definitely don't want an unlimited version at the top, because then it's going to have that really weird, derpy comment box. So have a look at them, make sure they all look good, pick the best picture you can and have that one as your main hero picture. So I've already done that tonight and I've got my one ready, and like I said, let's sort of get started and I'll carry on talking as I go through. Cool, so first thing you want to do, as I said, is just actually cut out the hero. So when I'm cutting with my blade, I like to cut it at an angle, so it sort of goes underneath whatever you're cutting. And because I try and hold the same angle the whole time, I always try and cut on the same side of the card. So in in most of the situations you'll see me cutting, the knife's going to be on the right of whatever it is, so end up spinning the card a fair bit to show that. Okay. So like I said, when I do them I like to try and get 4 layers in because it gets a bit of depth into the cards. The way I do mine as well, I like to make sure that I've got all of the background as well. There are others out there, and actually a shout out to Matilda Tilley. Saw an awesome Bravo by Matilda recently, and the way Matilda does hers is to focus just on the hero, which is something I hadn't thought of before I saw hers, but it actually looks real good, and it looks even better because of that background that she's put in it. The Arena's prayer is great. So as I'm cutting, anytime you get a full circle, just pop it out. Make sure you have a really good blade. I changed the blade over to start this video just to make sure I've got nice clean cuts, and make sure you've got spares because you're going to end up breaking the tips off as you're cutting the entire time. It's unfortunate sometimes. I mean, there's one Dorinthia I went through 4 blades. I was pretty annoyed with that. But because they're so fine, because you need them to be, unfortunately they do break from time to time. So with this Viserai, like I said, cutting around, and this is where we get to the first thing you need to actually think about in this Viserai. So like I said, when I'm doing Viserais myself these days, I don't follow my own process. The first card, like I said, you want to make sure you actually get the hero, and then from there it's a bit easier to work out the layers up and down. In this situation, that's sort of the process I'm showing you, and you get to your first hurdle when you get to this piece over here. So the idea with the 3D cards is the layers, you want to actually make sure they make sense. So if there's something in front of Viserai, I want to make sure that I have that on the Viserai cut, because the next layer on top of him is going to need to include that as well. So when I'm looking at this bit of Aether, I'm calling it Aether in the situation, I'm not great on the lore for Viserai, so I'm going to go ahead with Aether. So when I'm cutting this bit of Aether, the thing is, the top layer is absolutely going to need this piece of Aether coming through. So I'm going to need something to stick that to, so I need to include it in this layer. Okay. As I go through, there's going to be other little sort of tips and things that I like to do that help out. Now, when it comes to hair, hair can be a bit of a pain, especially if you're looking at Dorinthias, but I've got some tricks that I work on for that. The first one is, if you know that your card that you're currently cutting is not going to be the back layer, you don't have to be super precise with it, because you can kind of make it work for you that it looks like the hair is actually layered by missing cuts. You'll see a lot of the time when I'm doing these cuts, I'm spinning the card and trying to keep the knife pretty similar as well, which tends to help the way I do things anyways. Also, as I'm cutting the card, I get round to this side, and cutting on the inside becomes harder, so you sort of try and keep it there. Now, because I know with Viserai in this situation that I'm going to have another card at the back, like I said, if I miss a cut for his hair, or if I miss some of the purple bits of his hair, it's not a problem. What I want to make sure I do get though is the black bits of the hair. So I've got to his shoulder now, I'm going to carry on going round. So again, we're getting round to this side. Like I said at the beginning, Viserai is a great one to use as this example because it's probably the hardest when it comes to layers. Okay. Again, we look at this bit of Aether that's going across him. I'm going to definitely want that as my top layer, so I need to make sure that I've got something to stick the top layer to, so I'm going to carry on cutting around it. Okay. Now when you're cutting thin lines like this, I have found cutting the same direction both times is the best way to do it. So at the beginning I said I'd try and keep my blade on the outside of the picture. Situations like it you just can't, because if I'm cutting one line like this, and I'm turning the card around and trying to do the same on this side, it pulls the card, and when you've got a real thin line, that doesn't work very well. So when you've got those lines, try and thin lines anyways, try and cut either side and then join in at the end. So like I said, because I know I've got another layer at the back here, I'm going to try and cut as close to the purple as I can, leaving some of the black out, because what you'll see with a finished visceri, have I got one? I haven't got a finished one, I've got an almost finished one though. That's what it's going to end up looking like, and you're going to want to cut the black bits out at the end as well. So I've almost got around my first layer. When it gets pretty dark, you sometimes have to get quite close just to make sure you're getting it right there. Okay, and then again with this one, I'm going to try and keep the picture on the left or the inside of my blade so that I can see exactly what's going on. Cool. So with that first cut, that's actually probably the hardest bit of it. If I was doing a Dorinthia, I wouldn't say that, but Visceri's border's not too bad. So if you can pop it out like that, you know you've done your cuts right. So while I'm doing the border, it actually reminds me, I did see those two new cards, the two instants that have been semi-spoiled anyways. Those look pretty sweet, can't wait to find out what they actually do. But while I'm on it, I remember seeing somebody saying something about warrior and rune blade borders, so just wanted to, I guess, a bit of info for people out there that may not know this, but all the borders for any of the heroes anyways, and their specializations are all based on the area and wraith that they come from. So this border that I'm cutting out at the moment is a demonastery border, not necessarily a rune blade border, although that's where this one comes from. And a good example of that is actually Kasai. So Kasai being a warrior, if you look at her background, now I would choose her, that's a too bad example because it's the one area of Wraith that I actually can't ever remember the name of. But anyways, it's the same area that Kano's from. So when you're looking at her border and Kano's border, you'll see that they are the same. So similar to Cavdane, Cavdane's border looks exactly the same as Alia's, and it's because they're both from the pits. So different borders, especially when you're doing these 3D cards, you want to know which ones you're doing. Visceri's not too bad because, as you can see, most of the time that I'm cutting, it's one cut this way, one cut that way. I can turn the card to help me out for most of it. Okay, Dorinthia's border, or the border for Solana, is my most hated. Oh, and there goes a blade. So this is why you need spares.
Fix it as Volcor.
What's that?
Volcor.
Volcor, thank you. I always forget that one. Now, you'll see I've got blades and I've kept them in two different directions. And my little keeper here, that's because one of them's the broken ones and one of them's the fixed ones. You also see I've got another knife there. That's my blunt knife for B, and this is my sharp knife for S. You do still use the blunt ones for some things, so don't just toss them. Now, with what was I talking about? Art borders, Dorinthia's border. She has way too many circular pieces, and it's really hard to get circular cuts. So the Solana border is probably my least favourite to do. But a lot of the times you're doing borders, you can get away with exactly what I was doing there. One cut this way, one cut that way. Proof of the pudding is at this point when you try and pop it out. Now, most of the time you're not going to get a clean pop because you're going to have missed a cut at some point. Okay, so you want to try and get as much of it as possible. When it's not coming out, then you at least know the point that you didn't meet the cuts. So that's that one there. Tell me I didn't. Oh, I thought I broke another blade. Sweet. So now he's popping all off. When you're breaking them off, try and go in the direction with the cut so you're not losing them. Otherwise you might have lost some hair there. Carry on pulling. Now this is going to be the first video I do. I'm going to do another one, potentially drop it next week. Today's all about the cutting and little techniques I've learned while cutting. The thing that I found actually made these things work the best is the painting. So another shout out, Sam Yuen, in December last year I think it was. Sam actually did the first one of these I saw, and it was at Dorinthia, and I was stoked when I saw it. It looked awesome, and that's sort of what got me trying to do these, and everything else. I did my first one, it looked okay, but I couldn't figure out why I was getting, it just didn't look good when you put it together, and when I had a closer look, it was because of all the white cuts. Now early on, in this video I did say when you're cutting to try and cut at an angle, so I'm cutting underneath, okay, and that's also why you want to try and keep the blade on the same side. So in this situation you can see this side, if you're looking at it from above, you don't see any white. On this side you do, and that's because I keep my blade at the same angle, and when I was talking about cuts in the same direction, it ends up being higher there. Okay, so that white is not going to look so flash when you put it on top of things, and that's where the painting side of things comes into, so that we'll talk about in the next video. So that's the first layer. Now what I do after that, like I said, this is your main layer, so that's the one you want to pick with the best picture, and actually, given I can see that's an unlimited, the other one might have been slightly better, but oops. At that point, what's really helpful is actually just stick it on top of another card. So having a look at it like that, you can automatically see what's directly behind them, and what's the next layer out. So in this situation I'm going to work down and then put new layers on top afterwards. So I'm going to do the back layer next. So the back layer in this situation, all I want to do is I want to cut out anything that's not purple. Now, like I said, the way I do them, I like all the background in them, or as much of it as possible, so that's what I'm going to do here. And I'll just move that one aside and get started. So one of the things I did that is against my own advice in that first one, but that's sort of from a storytelling perspective to make sure I can let you know the process, was anytime you've got an internal cut, which is something like this, you want to do it before you do any other cuts. The reason for that is you want the card to have as much integrity as it can at the point you're cutting, because if you look at this one, I'm cutting pretty close to that line. Now cards like Viserai, Kano's another good example of this. You want to make sure you're trying to get these real tight cuts and real tiny cuts as much as possible. And while you're doing it, the best way to do it is to make sure the card's still got as much of the integrity as possible. So when I did that first one, I started by just cutting around him. That was just to sort of show you the first process that you should think about when you're cutting one of these, is making sure the hero is the main part of this process, so cutting him out first. Like I said, this is going to be the back layer, so I just want to cut all the black out of it. And what I have found when I'm doing these is a lot of it's actually, it looks like triangles most of the time that I'm cutting them out. And it just sort of seems to be the way that the art has worked. So, okay, now if you start getting messy pieces like that, you can always just take your blade and tidy it up, and like I said, don't stress too much because the paint will fix things. Cool. So just get rid of all the background here, and my favourite part about doing the background is the fact that I don't have to do any borders. Cool. So while I'm cutting this, I'm just going to have a quick look. No. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer. Like I said at the beginning, I'm by no means the I guess the main source of information for these things. I just like to share things that I've heard, that I've learnt as I go, and like I said, if we're looking at something like Matilda's Bravo, it's something I would have never thought to do by just having the hero out there, but man, it looks good. So everyone's got the way that they want to do it, and the way that the heroes are going to work for them, and I'm just here to share any bit of advice I can on how I do it. And yeah, feel free to hit me up on Facebook, just send me a message, ask me any questions you want. I do commissions, but at the same time, in fact somebody said, why are you doing a video to teach people how to do things? If you do commissions you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. And yeah, maybe, but to be honest, I just love these things, and Fab's just such an awesome community that I want to try and give back wherever I can, and yeah, I just find that everyone's super friendly and wants to help each other out. Oops. So, Greg, are there any questions in the chat at all? Or? No, sweet.
This ages ago. I finished 2 cards and the third one was rock lightning, so I was like, oh, I'll play the full lightning. I thought that was being that you were just not being able to make
Where did you get your blades from?
Where do I get my blades from?
Yeah.
Just from an art shop. So this one's actually from an art shop, probably about 10 metres that way. But what I can say is I've tried a few blades. You don't need a fancy one. This one cost me $9 New Zealand and it came with 5 blades, so probably $6 US. It's next to nothing to actually buy these things, so you don't have to have something fancy. But like razors, check how much the blades cost, and make sure you can actually get them, because as you saw pretty early on, you're going to break blades, especially if you're doing cards that you want the backgrounds done for, because there's a lot of little intricate cuts you've got to worry about, like this one I'm about to come to, where I'm going to actually use my own advice in the situation and keep cutting in the same direction to make sure you can get a nice pointy end.
I always did the same thing.
Okay. And I try to use the blade to pop things out, because like I said, the blades are pretty weak, so if something's not popping out, you've missed a cut somewhere, or you've just missed a join. And one other thing you'll see here is I'm actually just cutting out a bit of purple. Doesn't matter. You don't have to be perfect on these things, and at the end of the day, it's your card. So you're making these for you. If you make a miscut or something, don't stress. It's a little bit harder when I'm doing commissions, because I want to try and make sure I don't get miscuts. So I end up potentially cutting a card again because it didn't work very well. But when you're doing your own ones, don't stress about it too much. You will find that you can paint a fair bit to tidy things up, but also doesn't need to be perfect. The effect comes from having multiples stacked together, and what I found is the best effect comes from the foiling you put in behind. So 2 cards done. Again, put it on top, have a bit of a look. Now I'm looking at Viserai. His hair's there, he's got a bit of extra hair at the background, so this is a good example of what that looks like. I mentioned Dorinthia earlier, and that's one of the things that took me a while to actually realise, is you don't have to have super clean cuts. So each of those 3 Dorinthias, each of those 3 Dorinthias has a different hairstyle. So the top one that you're doing, you can definitely cut things away. The second one you're doing, again, you can cut a little bit less, and then the third one, the back one, you want to make sure you got real tidy. So your back card and your front card are the 2 that you absolutely want to make sure are pristine. The back card, you want to make your cuts as clean as possible, and get as much detail as possible for the actual figurehead. For the front card, you want to make sure your border is as tidy as possible. So when I'm doing a Dorinthia as an example, like I said, the borders suck. But I usually get a brand new clean blade when I start on a Dorinthia. I'll do the top one first, and I will make sure that I do the border absolutely first thing I do to make sure I get it as clean as possible. So, yep, that's showing the Dorinthia, I guess, while I've got Dorinthia out here. If you were to have used the process that I used, this would have been your first cut. Once you've got that first cut of the actual hero sitting there, then you can have a look and see, well, what can I put in front of that hero? Armor's a great one for putting another layer on top. What can I do behind? One thing I found that I quite really like with Dorinthia actually is you put half of her cape in the front, the bit that's literally at the front of the picture, and put the rest of it at the back. You can see the light and dark, and what it looks like when you're putting it all together is like the flap has actually come over, like the art's trying to show you what's happening. So quite like that one out of a Dorinthia. So that's pretty much my process. I'm not going to cut these last 2 because it might get a bit boring watching me cut the same stuff over and over again. But here are 2 that I've prepared earlier. So when I'm looking at a brand new Viserai, I'm looking at the 2 on top of each other, and at this point I'm saying, well, what's sitting in front of Viserai? What can I actually start getting ahead of it? So that's where I've put his arm is clearly reaching forward, and any of the aether explosion out the front of him. And at that point I've got 3 layers, and to be honest I could stop there, and absolutely that could be the end of the Viserai. But what I really wanted to show in this one is actually in front of that aether burst, he's still reaching further forward. So I just did his arm and nothing else. So if I compare that to a Dorinthia, on the top layer it's just the armour. So any of the heroes wearing armour, it's quite nice to get that armour out in front. Have I got a Bravo? The Bravo's already completed, but what I do with the Bravo is I actually cut just his coat out and stick that on top, so it looks like he's wearing his coat. So that's some of the cool stuff you can do with these guys. Like I said, I love doing it. I love the community, so I want to try and help out. Hit me up on Facebook if you have any questions or anything like that. And a huge shout out to Greg for letting me use the rig here at the local store, Dice Jar Games, that we play out on Friday night. I'm usually over there playing, but I wanted to do a video and I don't have a setup like this, and turns out there was an odd number for Armoury tonight, so happy to sit out and do this instead so you can show you guys how it all works. Yeah, sweet. Like I said, thanks heaps for watching, and I'll do another one with some painting next time. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we do that. I'm just playing. Do we just play the association?